My wife and I are celebrating our 36th wedding anniversary next week. She
Wild applause ripples through the EconTalk audience.
Well, she has developed a sense of humor about this. She says we've been happily married for 12 years, not consecutive. So of the 36, we've been happily married for 12. There doesn't have to be a majority. It's all fine. She was reading Hillary Clinton's new book. Hillary Clinton and a co-author wrote a book about the sort of thinly disguised Donald Trump and problems of international relations and threats of nuclear war. And in it, they mention the secretary problem.
Whoa.
And she says, do you know the secretary problem? And I said, I had literally just read about your discussion of the secretary problem. And my wife and I then had about a 15-minute conversation that I think an outsider might have characterized as an argument, but we've been married 36 years and it was a discussion, I can assure you. She's a professional litigator, so you should pity me. I lose every argument because professional litigators are pretty good at arguing.
Mike, I don't pity you. You know I pity her. You know that.
Yeah, everyone pities her, including herself. So it caused us to have this really interesting discussion about somewhat different experiences with the same thing, but it is because we have 36 years of becoming the sort of people that participate in marriage that way. So I think it is fair to say our marriage is pretty discursive. It wasn't at first, and it may have been
what does that mean, discursive?
We talk about things, we argue about things, we try out claims, and then we actually count on the other person to show mistakes in the claim that we've made. I rely, and she relies on me, I think, to be able to help us work through things. So it's discursive in the sense that we don't brood. We tend to talk about things.
It's like an EconTalk episode, you're saying.
Then many people have suggested you and I get married, in fact, for just that reason.
Yeah.
I think
we've been happily married for 16 years.
Well,
42 episodes.
And they were consecutive. I think it is fair to say we're not always happily married at the beginning. And it was a problem of becoming. So I worry my good friend Steve Horowitz, who has now passed away, was inexplicably a big fan of the band Rush. And one of their songs had the line, "If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice." And I worry that many people approach marriage that way. That in effect, they decide not to get married because they can't come up with a list of reasons why they would want to get married. And the fact is, you don't really know about whether this is going to work until 3 years or 5 years down, because you become the sort of person that wants to be married to the person that has become your spouse.
Yeah.
And it actually takes intentionality. You have to want to become the sort of person who is married. So you use the example of going to Chicago. Well, if I think that becoming married is going magically to transport me to a land of delights, and after 3 years it hasn't happened, I think, well, that was a mistake. Yeah. No, you have to get in the car and fight traffic and get lost and go to Chicago. That's how marriage works. It's actually the trip of deciding I'm going to go there. Now, how you get there is going to be difficult, but sitting and waiting and saying, I want to be in Chicago and marriage is going magically to transport me there is a mistake. So when you talk about the secretary problem, the difficulty is that, and you use the example of eHarmony, which I thought you might talk about for a bit, because I think many people would compare, and you rightly make the contrast. The eHarmony problem looks like the secretary problem in the sense that I sample some possible spouses and then I pick the best one. But that's not the way eHarmony works. So could you talk about that?
Well, I want to talk about your marriage first.
Okay.
Because I think first I want to put a footnote on there. You know, your wife makes this joke. So how long have you been married? Well, we've been happily married for 12 years. Not in a row, right? And the Gilbert point would be, well, you made a mistake, Mike, because you chose a spouse that led to only 1/3 of the time being pleasant and 2/3 not so pleasant, and therefore you made a mistake. And what I understand you to be saying, which I think is profound, is that that's not the right calculus. The right calculus is, how about the next 36 years? Am I going to, even if you're a utilitarian, am I going to be 24 out of 36 for those next 36, or am I going to be 12 again? And you hope to be a different person than you were when you first got married. You hope to interact with your wife in a different way. And I'm going to put a footnote here because we haven't talked about this yet. I want to make sure we talk about it. And then we'll come back to your question, which you remember and I won't. But, and I even forgotten what the question is, what the footnote was. Oh, that when Darwin makes his list of pros and cons, not surprisingly, he's thinking mostly about himself. Mm-hmm. He's thinking, am I going to enjoy this? When you get married, you come to the view that it's not just about you. It's about us. And this is a very trite thing to say, but it's quite important and quite powerful. Economics is not well suited to us. It's much better at me. And to think about what we might want would entail making a sacrifice from time to time, even a sacrifice that might not pay off as, oh, well, but future gains will be higher, right? And so I think that, which is the economist tautology, and I think that's really important. I think what you're saying about marriage, I was talking about this in a different interview about how much I hate the phrase, you have to work at your marriage. As if, you have to schedule a workshop that once a week, 45 minutes a week, you've got to talk about yourself and how your marriage is working with your spouse and then work things out. And I think that's a totally misleading model. You might do that from time to time, but that's not what it really means to work at your marriage. To work at your marriage, what it really means, and that phrase doesn't capture it, so I don't like it. To work at your marriage means to work at yourself. It means to consider things other than you in how the person you live with interacts with you and vice versa. And I think that's the discursive part, which is really, really quite beautiful. You're accepting the reality that for you to have a good life with this other person, you need to interact with each other in unpredictable ways. And it's going to come, you're going to evolve, the two of you together and each of you individually from the interactions with each other. And that's really what marriage is about.